So you've been rejected from a job application from a university, whatever it is. We're going to talk about what that means, and I'm going to share with you the perspective or philosophy that I've adopted that I've found helps me get over rejections very quickly and honestly helps me process them in a way that I think is healthy. So the first thing I want to discuss is what actually a rejection means and what goes into one as a setup for the logical journey or thought process that I want to take you on to land on the philosophy on how to process it and get over it quickly. Because rejections can sting, rejections can be annoying, and rejections can feel personal. So let's start with this. What goes into getting a rejection? When you think about something like a job application, you probably think that when you get rejected, it's because your CV wasn't good enough or your experiences weren't good enough or that someone beat you, right? Like we have this perspective that we are competing for a lot of these things, which is true, right? Like you are competing for a certain amount of slots and you are being compared often in a lot of these contexts. But what I want you to realize is that what goes into a yes is not the same as what goes into a no necessarily. So let's start with this. If someone accepts you, if a university accepts you, if a company accepts you for a job, whatever it is, usually it is because of things like your CV, your experience, the performance you gave at an interview, and things like that. So it is super valid to consider these factors as important in processes where rejection or acceptance is involved, right? Your CV is one of the first things or the only things that recruiters or universities see is your curriculum, right? And then the interview is often the only point of contact they have with you. So often those factors work really well at determining and setting up and explaining an acceptance because that's what it's based off of. Where I would argue there's a huge difference between that and rejection is it's not the same perspective, reality, or meaning when it comes to a rejection than it is to an acceptance. When you get rejected from something, I'm going to take a job application as a great example. Oftentimes, it isn't necessarily a rejection of your curriculum, your CV, your experience, rather than a rejection of you being a good fit for what you're applying for. For example, let's say you're super qualified and you're top of your class and working in a really great company, or you've done really great internships and you have all that curriculum behind you and it's on your CV, but you still get rejected for a sort of normal job that you thought would be easy to get and that you thought would be, very attainable. The reality may just be, and often is, that the reason behind that isn't your profile, your experience, and your personality, but rather the fit that the employer or company or person rejecting you sees or doesn't see. And honestly, a lot of the times, from what I've seen, what I've heard, it seems to be the case a lot more than when it comes to an acceptance. For example, a job may be looking for a specific profile and they just haven't communicated that well in the job description. A university, and especially nowadays, may be adopting a process of selection that isn't just based on curriculum and experience and CV, or even the soft traits that you exhibit, like an interview or an essay. They're often casting for roles almost. And maybe that means they only have, 3 spots for debate people and 2 spots for artists and 1 spot for an engineer, and you just happen to be an extra engineer, right? So that's the first thing I want you to realize is what goes into a yes isn't necessarily the same as what goes into a no. A no is heavily dependent on time and circumstances and fit and what the other party that is rejecting you is honestly looking for. It is a lot more logical to then say that a rejection means this isn't the right place for you, this isn't the right time for you, than it ever would be to say that you aren't good enough for it. Beyond that, those 2 examples I gave where the party that is looking for a candidate may have things that they're looking for that aren't clearly communicated, there are circumstances where you might think that something is an amazing fit. Like you see that job posting and you're like, this was written with me in mind. This is exactly who I am. This is exactly what I'm looking to do. It's a perfect fit. It's my dream school, whatever it is, right? Like you might think you're a perfect fit for something, and it may well be that you are a perfect fit for something. But let me tell you something that we often forget, that I used to forget. Even if you are the perfect fit for something, it doesn't mean they are going to take you or accept you. And it doesn't mean that you weren't when they reject you. Stupid examples. They might have a person internally that is already an employee at the company that is applying to this job as well. And it may simply be that it is easier to onboard someone on a new team that's already been onboarded to a company than it is to onboard someone externally. And that might be the case. It might also be the case that there's bias involved. And that's obviously a huge factor. There might be preferences that recruiters or certain people involved in the decision process may have had, either consciously or unconsciously, that may have factored into the decision. So there are so many factors, and I hope I've just listed a few that are convincing enough for you, at play when it comes to getting rejected or accepted in any opportunity or scenario, honestly, professionally, socially, personally, whatever. And it is my philosophy, and I wanted to set you up with this reasoning before we get into what I do to get over rejections. It is my philosophy that those factors that aren't you related come a lot more into play in explaining rejections than they do acceptances. Rejections just mean you're not the fit for this specific thing at this specific time. Whereas acceptances then can be different and can be more rationally explained with, you know, you have a great CV, you beat people out, you're the best at this thing. Like that may be more rational, arguably not. Like there's a lot of luck involved, and obviously luck plays a huge factor, but arguably, at least in our minds and in the way we think, it's easier and maybe more justifiable to argue that factors that are you dependent, like your CV and experience, apply to rationally explain acceptances than they do rejections. And once you think like that, it's just hard to ever take a no personally. Because how could you? You now know without a doubt that there are so many factors involved, some that you can control and some that you can't, that are involved that you don't even know about, that may even be unconscious. And so this is super important, because once you realize this and you think like this, you get to the second part and the most useful part of this video and this thought process, which is how to process rejections and how to think of them and get over them. The way to get over them quickly is to think of them in this vein and to really sit down, process a rejection, especially if it's something big that you've been thinking about for a long time or that you put a lot of effort in, like applying to universities or your dream job that, you know, you did a lot of interviews for and didn't just apply for quickly. It's to sit down, take the time to actually process it, because it is valid to be annoyed by it and to you know, feel bad about it and things like that. Sit down with yourself and actually have a conversation almost with yourself, just self-reflection, and be like, okay, look, I did my best at applying to this. I communicated what I thought were the things that showed fit really well. Tell yourself that, and then realize, okay, I can spend a little bit of time processing this. Once you've done that, it really is just looking at it as no means next opportunity. It means that you're going to look for the next thing that makes more sense, both on your end and on the other party's end, and pursue that. And that's it. That's all. Now, I know some of you, and I do sometimes, can't really handle that simplicity because it's tough, you know. You might have put in a lot of effort, and that was complex effort, and this simple approach may not work very easily. As this is where I recommend you think about the next step, like we said, next opportunity and things like that, and reflect upon persistence, okay, and when it's appropriate and when it's not. This can be a whole video in and of itself, but I try to make it quick. In the context of being rejected or you know, not getting into things, it can be easy when you go through your stages of grief, because that's kind of what it is. You had this idea in mind and you kind of got, you know, it got killed. When you go through your stages of grief, there may be a stage, you know, between denial and you know, sadness or something like that, where you feel like you got to email, you know, the admissions office and contest or ask for an explanation, you know, even if it's not you related. You want the details of like why someone else was a better fit at that time than you. That's persistence, you know, or determination in a way. But there's a fine line between the two, and when they're appropriate and when they're not. I think persistence and determination can be the most positive, most beautiful qualities in a person in the way they work and their work ethic and things like that in any context, right? In almost every context, because that's how you get things in life. Everything's negotiable, takes effort. People, you know, are busy. You got to remind them things like that. But, and this is a huge but, it really is important to read the room, read the situation, and be socially aware of when it is appropriate and when it isn't, and to be ethical and things like that. You know, I would argue it is much more dangerous and much more negative to be passive and not determined and not persistent and lose out on an opportunity because of that, than to push too much and be too persistent and too annoying and too, almost to the point of harassment, right? Or like, I'm thinking of someone emailing a recruiter like 30 times, but whatever. And doing that and ruining your reputation or damaging your reputation. Because the difference is, the first one, you just lost out on one opportunity. But the second, the latter we just talked about, you just damage your reputation, harming your ability to get future opportunities. And that is a lot worse. And so in the same way that I respect this quality and this trait and encourage you to pursue it in the appropriate context, if you feel like it's ambiguous or you're not sure, it is better to err on the side of less persistence and less determination for your own sake. And it can be counterproductive to be persistent. But by all means, send cold emails, reminders, follow-ups, especially if you're doing so respectfully and you're reading the room and you think you're socially aware and you've done your research, and do that. But keep in mind that it isn't appropriate for all contexts and all situations. But that was a final note. I hope this helps you at least think about your rejection more healthily so that you could process it. I am not a therapist, and so I didn't give you ways to cope that maybe you would have expected in this video. I can't do that. But at least I hope I shared with you a more rational, calm, new approach of looking at a rejection that could then help you find your own ways to cope with it and move on from it quickly. And it's helped me tremendously. In this department, especially when it's a job application or university application or grant application, scholarship, whatever it is much better to approach this with this rational perspective than an emotional one where you take it personally. Because honestly, there is a lot of things involved that you can't control, and a lot of luck and a lot of timing and a lot of things like that. So best of luck. I hope you get your next opportunity soon. And just remember, no means next opportunity. All right, see you. Subscribe if you liked it. Bye.